Hey guys, my name is Sean McCown. I'm with Minionware Software. I'm the lead architect. I'm a certified master. We do 100% free training videos at midnightdba.com. And we also do Midnight SQL Consulting, and we write the best SQL maintenance software out there, and it's 100% free. And today I think I'm going to be talking about, let's see, Steve, I'm scheduled to talk about loading data with PowerShell. That's right. So
Yes.
let's go ahead and get started. Hey, everybody. I'm Sean, and today we're going to be talking about loading data from SQL with PowerShell. And it's actually loading it to and from the database with PowerShell, right? Because, you know, there's not much you can do with it taking it out of SQL unless you put it somewhere. So now I'm going to do my best to keep this at an hour because it's a very big topic. And there's only so much of me that, you know, people can take. And first, let's start off with reading data from PowerShell. Oh, good, I've got that clear. Let me clear the screen. Now, what this is not going to be is this is not going to be a session on basic PowerShell. If there's something you don't understand, just ask me and I'll explain it. But I assume that you know the basics of PowerShell, and we don't get, you know, really any further than basic syntax, right? It doesn't get too much worse than this. So let's talk about reading data out of SQL. The first method that you can use is the Invoke Sql Command. It's a built-in commandlet. You have to import the module of SQL PS. And the thing is that it really depends on what version of SQL you're on. We went from, SQL Server Commandlet 100 and SQL Server, whatever the other one was. Remember when we first got it in 2008, we had to import these two things, and then we went to SQL Server and then SQL PS. So it really depends on which version of SQL you're on. But once you get that module imported, you have access to Invoke Sql Command, which does just what it says. It invokes SQL Command. So I'm going to select star from dbo.drivespace. I'm going to put that in a query parameter or in a variable. I'm going to assign it right there. And I'm going to save that entire result set as a variable. And then I'm going to pipe that variable out to a format table and select all the columns. Easy enough. And I've got these loaded. .whack 01. So they are just numbered. There we go. So I get all of this information here. Now, Invoke Sql Command is a really easy way to get started with querying from SQL. I used this for a very long time until speed became an issue, which we're going to talk about later. But you see how I get all of my columns here from my table. And some of these guys, execution date time, instance ID, name, caption, drive letter, all that capacity, right? Now, we can look at this object, this A object here. If I come into here and say, show me, let me go here, show me this variable, it's empty. I get nothing, right? Because once I leave the script, because I'm not doing this in line, I'm doing this in a script, right? So once that script finishes, all of the objects in this script shut down. They get disposed of. So a way to get around that is to do what we call dot sourcing. And what dot sourcing does is it changes the scope of the variables inside that script to be session scoped instead of script scoped. So now when I do that again, I'm going to get the same result set. But now when I do A, I get all of the objects. I get all of the rows from A. So now I can do something like A pipe to a get member. and I can see all of the members here, including the type of object is a data row right there. So I got these properties here, and you see these guys correspond with the data columns, right? Execution date, time, file space, label, name, capacity, caption, drive letter, all of these guys are up here, right? So that's one of the things that this object does for you, this commandlet does for you, is it takes all of those rows and puts them in a proper data row object and gives you the disparate data, right? Or the discrete data. Now, what we mean by discrete data, this gets kind of overlooked a lot, right? Is actually, I'll show you in just a second. Let's go ahead and move on to SQL Command. Now, if
Sean?
Yes.
Even before that, so I see you using PowerShell Studio 2017. I think the only tools that I used or saw were PowerShell ISE and VS Code. Any reason why you're using this, and what's which company it's coming from?
Oh, yeah, right. So this is a tool by Sapien, and I'm using this because I've used it for years and I really like the way it does things. I use code every now and then, but frankly, for PowerShell coding, it's actually kind of aggravating. It's the little things, right? Like when I double click on a variable, it doesn't copy the $, right?
Yeah.
So I always have to copy the $. I always have to type the $sign myself, or so it's little things like that that aggravate me in code. So there's nothing wrong with it necessarily as an editor. I've just been using this for years and I love the way it does things. I've got everything set up the way I want to and all that. So that's why I use Sapien. I tried to make my stuff start using code and it's just painful. Right.
And Sapien is free?
Sapien is not free. No.
Okay, got it.
Right. But it does things, and there are other tools that do this for you, but it does things like I can build my PowerShells into EXEs.
Okay.
I can this up as an EXE and send it to somebody.
Sounds like it's more advanced than VS Code and ISE.
Yeah, but like I said, there are other tools that can do that for you if you so wish.
Okay.
So let's see, where was I? Oh yeah, so Invoke Sql Command, it calls SQL Command for you, right? It's in the name, right? It invokes SQL Command. So therefore, when we call SQL Command, we ought to be able to do pretty much the same thing, right? So let's go ahead and run number 2, and we're saving this in the CMD variable. So let's go ahead. I'm going to clear screen, and we'll say .whack 02. There we go. Only now I get this all jumbled up, right? That's not the same at all. I mean, the information is there, right? But everything is all jumbled up. So let's take a look at what happened here. Let's run this again, .sourced, .space. There we go. I get the same thing. Now, if I look at CMD, and let's run that through a get member as well, you see instantly that it comes through as type of string. Remember when we ran Invoke Sql Command, it came through as a proper data row, right? With discrete data. And look, the only property I have now is length, because that's the only property you have for a text object, right? For a string object. So now let's go ahead and go back and define discrete data. Discrete data in a database sense means that every piece of data stands on its own, is in a separate object, right? Like these columns. Let's come into SQL real quick and let's look at these columns in SQL, right? So each one of these is a single piece of data that is stored in a separate column itself, or if you're an old timer, in a separate domain, right? All on its own. What stands for discrete data, and what discrete data means in your organization is going to change, right? Some people would think that discrete in the date sense would mean separating the year, month, day, and all of that into separate columns so that they can query it easier by the month or the day or the year or whatever, right? So that could be discrete in some instances. Sometimes you'll see address columns broken out, right? You'll see address all as one field, and then you'll have city, state, and zip in separate columns. But then every now and then you'll have the street number broken out, and then the name of the street itself in another column, and then all of those other things that they're, right? And phone numbers are the same way, right? Most of the time you see phone numbers in a single column, but sometimes you see it broken down into country code, area code, prefix, and then whatever the hell that's called, the suffix, I guess, broken down into completely separate columns so you can search so you can index and search more discreetly. So that's what discrete data means, is everything is broken up into individual bits of information. You remember here, when we did the Invoke Sql command, we got those discrete pieces of information, right? Because this was a proper data row, and every single one of the columns coming from the table was a property on that data row, and we could just access it. But when I come here, you see I get length, right? So what I get from SQL command is what I like to call the puke of text, right? It's just going blah and just spitting text out on the thing, and it's a single text object. This is not discrete data because everything is a single object. If you wanted to make this a discrete object, then you would have to regex the hell out of this thing, for one thing, right? I mean, it would just be impossible to regex this thing. And you'd have to do that for every single result set you got back. Even if you're only pulling back a single column of data, a single information like add at version or something like that, right? Or get date, you still have the column information, the column name, and this dotted line thing to deal with. So you'd still have to regex that out of it. So the rule is, when you're reading from SQL, ever use, I'm having mouse troubles. There we go. Come on. Never use SQL command, because you don't get discrete data. All you get is a text object that just throws up everything as a single block of text. Always use some other method when you're reading from SQL. And Invoke Sql Command, especially if you're not good with PowerShell, is an outstanding place to start, because it's extremely simple, right? You define the instance, the database, the query. Always put your query in a variable. We'll talk about that later. And then you can do anything with it you like. Are we good on that? Yes. So.
Yes.
And you don't have to keep your mic off unless you're like got a jackhammer outside your door or something, right? So let me ask you a question though. If I am inserting row, if I'm inserting data or updating data into SQL, can I use SQL command, or am I still stuck with using Invoke Sql command? What do you think?
I think you can use Invoke as well.
Well, yeah, but can I use SQL command?
I think so.
Absolutely, because you're writing data then, right?
Yep.
So, and it's got some pretty nice error handling stuff, right? So, I mean, it's not like perfect, but for a command line, it's not too bad.
So what you're saying is SQL command is probably better for update, insert, and delete, because it doesn't give you probably any data back. Like select.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And never use it for reading. I mean, you can if you want to, but you've seen the problem with it. So, you know.
Yeah, it looks ugly, yes.
Do it at your peril, right? And you can't read it. So, okay, let's move on to some more sophisticated methods. And this is where most DBAs usually bow out, right? Looking at the .NET objects. And most DBAs, myself included, for a very long time, absolutely despised this because the .NET code for doing this is just ugly as hell, and it confuses the hell out of us with all of the objects and all of that, right? If you're good with PowerShell, you're a little bit better with this kind of thing, but still the methods are absolutely terrible, right? So I've encapsulated these into functions, put the server and the database name up there, and we're just passing into this function, we're just passing in the server name, the DB name, and the query as our variable. See, that query variable's already coming in handy, right? So the first thing you need to do when you read from SQL, or even write to SQL, right, is to create a connection, right? You have to connect to it. To do that, you create a connection object. This is just a .NET class that creates a SQL connection object, and you pass that connection object a connection string. It's a good old-fashioned OLE-DB connection string with data source, security, initial catalog, right? So nothing new there. If you've done any web coding at all, you've seen this. So now I've got my connection created. Now I have to create a command because I can't just connect to SQL and just sit there, right? I have to actually tell it to do something, whether it's, insert into this row, delete this row, or give me back these rows. I have to tell it to do something. So for that, I have to create a command object. And to the object, I'm going to pass in the query because it's a command. It has to have a query. I mean, that's the command. And the connection. So I have to tell it what connection I'm going to be running this command on. Then I have to do what? I have to open that connection. So I create the connection, I create the command, and then I open the connection. Easy enough. Now, I take that command object that I've tied to my open connection over here, and I'm going to do what's called execute reader. Now, this is the fastest way to read data out of SQL, bar none, period. This is just a fast forward cursor, as fast as .NET can read. Just boom, it's just going to spit the data out really, really fast. But that speed comes with a price. I'm going to save that to a reader variable. And I'm going to open up a results, basically a results array. And I'm going to say, while I can read from this reader, I'm going to create a row. Here we are again with another. What am I trying to say? Basically an array object. And I'm going to say for I equals 0. And while I is less than the field count, which means the number of columns in the table, right? And I'm going to increase it by 1. This all sounds confusing, and I'm only explaining it to you to show you how confusing it is. So for each row, I'm going to get the name of the current column, and then I'm going to get the value of the current column. Then I'm going to add that to the results up here, and I'm going to add that as a property.
And you would do it every row.
Yeah, and so for every row, I have to, and here's the thing, right? For every column as well, right? So for this one, see this I right here is 0. That's going to come in handy in a minute. And this I plus plus. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying for every single row, I'm going to say increase it by 1, increase it by 1, increase it by 1, right? And I'm going to say take the column, I'm going to say get the name of the column and then get the value of the column. And we're going to add them basically as a dictionary object, right? Or an array object. And I'm going to add it to this larger object. So this is, we're going to have a group of these objects. Then I'm going to close the connection, and then I'm going to print the results to screen. So let's take a look at that one. That's number 3. Now, if all that was nice and confusing, it's supposed to be. I think the .NET team, when they first did this, went out of their way to make it confusing. Actually, let's .source this one. We'll say 03 tab. There we go. So it was nice and fast, right? I mean, bam, bam, bam. That was quick. I don't know how many rows that is, but it's a lot of rows. Now let's take a look at, was that results? What was the name of that variable? Results. So let's take a look at results. And I'll say here, I'll pull a get member on that. Oh, didn't I .source that? Oh, that's right. I can't get that because one of the things with the reader is that it is, remember I said it's a fast forward cursor? Well, once you get it, you read that once, that's it. You're done. It spits it out once and it's finished. So I already read this data and it's done. So I can't read that data again. Sucks, doesn't it? So here we are with having to use this construct right here in row 20, and I'm having mouse troubles again, in order to get our columns. But the execute reader is the fastest way you can read data out of SQL. Now, that's the first method. The second method is to use a data set. And data sets basically do all that work for you. They're a tiny bit slower up front than the data reader, but you get something for that, right? So again, I'm going to create a connection variable with the connection object, and I'm going to pass it that connection string. Just another way to do it. I did it in line before, and now I'm doing it as a variable. I'm going to create the command, passing it in the query and the connection. So far, nothing's changed. I'm going to open my connection. Again, you have to open the connection. Now I'm going to create a SQL data adapter. I'm going to call it adapter, and I'm going to use this class, data SQL data adapter class, and I'm going to tie that to the command. So I'm tying that to that and that to that. So the adapter is tied to the command's tied to the connection, right? Then I'm going to create a data set using the data set object. Now, what happens here is when I read the adapter here fills the data set. So you see, I'm going to say adapter fill, and fill is a method, right? So I'm going to say fill. I'm going to use the adapter's fill method to fill this data set. And what that adapter does is it does all of this garbage for you. So all of this stuff that we had to learn to begin with, it gets done for you. And now I close my connection and I say, and I'm going to read by saying dataset.tables. Now, it's called data set for a reason, because it is not a table, it is a set of tables. It is a set of data. So there is a table object in here. Oh, haha. I'll go back and show you something in a minute. But there is a set of tables in here, which means that I can use a data set to bring back more than one table at a time. And I would just access that like an array. So, and I think I show you this a little bit later if we've still got time. But here, since there's only one table, I don't have to specify which table I'm doing, right? So this actually got run instead of results. That's what got run that first time. So I had the wrong one. I was actually calling number 2. So I need to be looking at query results here. There we go. So if I come here and say query results, get member, you can see now that I've got these properties here that are the same that I'm pulling back from the database. So it's the same thing as Invoke Sql Command in that I get these as properties, only it's faster than Invoke Sql Command because it has less overhead. And it's not quite as easy as Invoke Sql Command, right? But let's go back and look at this one because I did want to show you this. That's one thing I was, where am I? There I am. That's one thing that I was trying to figure out there a few minutes ago. Remember when I tried to run this guy, did I save that? Yep. When I tried to run this, a get member on this guy, on this results, and it said that, you know, it didn't exist. Well, I was trying to figure out how that was possible because I wasn't reading from the SQL reader anymore. I was reading from this guy, but I decided to move on. And so now I see why, because I was reading the wrong one. So now if I run this again with that first query, right? So let's come to here, dot source that one, and then come back to results. Oh, come on, man. Doing query one, results. Oh, that's the problem. I'm still piping it into query results. See, I got to get my stuff together here. So it's still going to be query results. There we go. Only now you notice the type of object has changed. This is a PS custom object. So it's not a proper data row. And instead of properties, I get the columns brought in as note properties because I built those myself. Now, functionally, we don't care. That's the same thing, right? But you look at the definition has changed, right? The definition is actually, you can see here, it's just a little dictionary object, right? I get the DB name and then the name, the size, and then the size, and the date time, and then the date time. So it's kind of like a little dictionary object. It just gets broken out. It gets parsed. So there we go. I'm glad I got that worked out in my own head, if nothing else. So two different ways to do this. You can do it with a data reader, which is the fastest, or you can do it with a data set and a data adapter, which isn't as fast, but almost as fast. I mean, we're talking about, you know, the difference between, you know, probably milliseconds, right? On a huge data set, you're talking about the difference between maybe a couple, 3 seconds, maybe, right? So, and that's maybe. So, you know, it's not that big of a deal. And you're going to see in this script, because here we're actually putting this into real use. I've taken it out of the function, and I'm just putting it straight into a script. And you can see I've done the exact same thing. There's my connection object. There's my connection string. I'm opening it. There's my SQL command object. Here's my query. I'm doing it inline this time. And I'm setting my connection. This time, I'm doing it just a little bit different. I'm setting dr equal to the execute reader. Dr stands for data row. So while dr has rows, I'm going to count the number of fields. And while I can read the rows, I'm going to do the same thing I did before. There's my beautiful thing, right? But look at this. Write host, dr get value 3, dr get value 4, right? So I'm getting top 10,000 star from collector.databases. Do you know which columns are 3 and 4, especially since it's a zero-based array? I don't, and I wrote this, and I've been dealing with this data forever, and I don't know which ones are 3 and 4, right? Which would be 2 and 3 in a zero-based array. So that's the problem you get into when you're doing something like this with a data reader is, yes, it's fast as hell, but you lose that manageability, right? Because this is absolutely unreadable. And the more data you're pulling back, the more rows you're doing. I mean, I import rows on a regular basis with 75, 150 columns, right? And this would not only make a much longer script, but that's completely unreadable. There's no way you could possibly support a script like this in any reasonable fashion, right? Now, one thing I do want to make very clear here is, this being a .NET call, but there are two different sides of this equation, right? And I like to call them reading and feeding. So the first one is reading. That's what we're doing now. We're reading from the data source. The second one is feeding, and that's what are you going to do with that data, right? Are you going to spit it out to Excel? Are you going to put it up on a web page? Are you going to feed it to another database, right? What are you going to do with that data? So you're going to feed something with that data. You're not just going to read it for nothing and then just get it back and just let it sit there, right? So the best advice I can give you is separate these two completely. Work out your reader first, then work out your feeder. So that's what we're doing here. We're working out our reader, right? What I mean by that is if I take this data and do something significant with it, let's say that I save it into another database in another server, and it's really, really slow, my troubleshooting just got twice as hard, right? Because I have no idea if the problem is between, the source network or the source disk or database, or the working from, or if it's from the destination, right? So if I get the reader worked out and it's lightning fast like this is, let's go ahead and run number 4. So I'll say .whack 04, and see, that's pretty fast. And I'm going through 10,000 rows, right? That's pretty fast. But if this is that fast, and then I go to do something with it, I go to save it to another table, and it slows way down, well, then I know the problem instantly. Highly fragmented. Maybe it's spending all of its time updating indexes, or, something like that, right? Maybe it's doing too many page splits, whatever, right? But at least I know where the problem stems from. It stems from, putting the data at its data source, or at its destination. So always get your reader worked out first, then do your feeder, and you'll be golden.
Sean?
Yes.
So you covered so far about 3 different ways. Which way is the fastest so far? The invoke, the SQL command, or the .NET?
The fastest right now would be the .NET with the data reader. So that's this one that we're doing now. Is the absolute fastest way you can read data. But it's also the most unworkable.
And it's also the one with most code.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely, because it doesn't do any of that housekeeping for you, right? Of giving you the column names and whatnot, right, as properties.
Okay.
So now let's take a look at the same thing done as a basic data set. So not only is all of this a bit cleaner, we've got the exact same connection, exact same command object and opening the connection. I'm creating my adapter. You'll recognize that from the other one, right? And now I'm calling it, or I'm setting my select command. Here is my data set object. I'm taking my adapter and I'm using its fill method to fill the data set object. Now, remember when I said before, when we were looking at these guys, right? That when I call this guy, when I return data back from it, it is an array of, it is a list of tables, right? It is a collection of tables. And that collection can be called simply by calling its number. So I can say call table 0, right? Or give me table 1, something like that, right? But you can also call it, and let's get rid of that. You can also name the tables. So since I'm pulling from databases, I'm saying take my data adapter and fill my data set that I just created in the previous line. And I want you to call this table that you fill it with databases. You got that? So now that I fill that, I can close my connection. And now I can say for each row in my data set, tables collection, just like we did in the other one, for the databases table, I want to get all of the rows, right? So I'm saying for each row in the row collection of the database table of my data set, I want you to pull in that row's DB name and DB size on disk, which is the same thing we did over there in our basic reader, only there we said get value and get value of 3 and 4. And now I know what those values are. I'm getting DB name and DB size on disk. So I'm showing you a lot here, but it's really not as bad as it seems, especially when do I have a method for packaging up these scripts for you guys? Y'all, is that part of your thing? Can I give you the scripts?
Sure.
Okay. So really, about all of this, all you need to know is to call one of these two methods, is to call one of these two functions. And all you got to do is pass it the server, the database, and the query, and you'll get your data back. So I've done all this work for you. I'm just explaining it to you, right? So I'm going to give you every one of these scripts and, just call one of these guys and, pass it the query and you'll be golden. So, don't feel like if you don't understand all of this, that you're sunk and this whole thing is a wash, because all you have to do is just call my functions and you'll be golden. So, and if you save it to a variable, like I did in this guy right here, then, you'll have those discrete objects and you can work with them just like you do anything else. But here, for every row, I've given this the databases moniker, and then we're golden. So this will do the exact same thing as the other one. It'll write the data out to the screen. I don't think we have to see that again. That was number 5. Let me start closing some of these again, and I'll reopen them if I ever need to. And we're on number 6. Now, we're going to consume the reader. And this is going to be a basic feeder that we're going to use to save to SQL using RBAR, right? That's row by agonizing row for people who aren't SQL addicts. Now, RBAR isn't necessarily a bad thing. I know that everybody wants to do bulk operations. Everybody wants to do bulk inserts and whatnot, and that's fine. And we're going to do that soon, by the way. But sometimes you actually need to do stuff at the row level, right? I mean, that's why SQL has cursors to begin with, right? Is because, sometimes you need row by row operations. Now, again, along with separating your reader, special note, and I'm using, what am I using here? Okay, I'm using the reader again. So I've got my insert query. I'm calling an SP. And again, look at how unwieldy this is in line 43. These are the SP params that I'm passing it. And with the reader, this is just ridiculous, right? There's only like 5 columns here, and that's already, I have no idea what I'm doing. I do right here, right? I have an insert state above it that I had before, so I know which values they are. But this is absurd, right? But what I want you to do is I want you to print these out to the screen. Never, never, never save something to the database without printing the query to the screen first. Because again, it's just gonna increase your troubleshooting if something goes wrong, right? Especially for us, we're DBAs, right? So DBAs like to be in SQL. And this one we are gonna run because I don't remember if there's a problem or not. We're gonna find out. CLS, and was that 06? Let's go .whack 06. There we are. Okay, so I've got all of my statements here printed out. And initially, it looks like they might be okay. But you see, there's an awful lot of them here, right? So that can be really hard to look through because there's so many of these things. So this is one of the rare times when I will let you output these to a file instead. So I'm going to still do that, but now I'm going to uncomment that and save it. And we're going to pipe these out to a file, and I've got that set to append. Let me make sure that file doesn't exist. It was inserts. Yeah, it looks okay. So now when I run this guy again, I'm going to clear screen. There we go. I got the same thing, only now, did I close that? I did close that, didn't I? Well, that was dumb. State modified. Oh, by all means, take your time. No, really, I've got nothing else to do. It's all you, baby. Come on, you can do it.
Maybe it's formatting behind the scenes.
Maybe. Geez, I didn't realize this was going to be such an ordeal. There we go. I thought it was saving to the same script. Speaking of advanced scripting, inserts. Huh, I wonder where that went. Stop it. Mouse troubles again. I wonder why it didn't create that file. Oh, because I didn't save it. Control S to save. Let's try that again, shall we? Ah, so I think I uncovered, that's that. Right, so you see we've got nothing but problems here, right? Input string was in the wrong format, blah, blah, blah. I've never had this specific problem with it, but I'm gonna go back to, oh, geez, I'm getting so fed up with stupid typos. There we go. You know, really give sessions because it shows people, you know, how to troubleshoot and that things don't always go your way. I mean, you know, you keep it to a minimum if you can. There's our inserts.txt. Woohoo, we did it. So now we've got all these guys. Now what you're going to do is copy that into Management Studio and try to run it. if nothing else, you're going to do a check on it. I do have some problems. So here, I've got a double comma. And probably here too, I've got a double comma. So you can see I do have some issues in there. And those issues probably come from the formatting of my RBAR code. So let's go back to here. And so it's doing exactly what I told it to, right? It's calling this with these values. But the problem is sometimes these values come in as null. And how do we specify a null in SQL? With null, right? You can't just commas there. So in order to deal with those nulls, you have to actually do something about it, right? Now, those nulls were coming in on the mirroring partner, I'm pretty sure. And let's look at mirroring for a second. When you have mirrored databases, probably most of the databases in your environment aren't mirrored, right? I mean, if you've got, 100 servers with, 40,000 databases on there, you don't have 40,000 mirrored databases. So most of the time, most of this data coming in from mirroring partner is going to be null coming in from SQL. And so it's doing exactly what we told it to, right? It's saying set mirroring partner equal to the current mirroring partner coming in from the database list. And it's doing exactly what we told it to. So let's take a look at this insert query. This is number 7. .whack 007. And you see that's really pronounced here. We had 2 nulls in the other one, but here we've got all trailing commas, right? Because that's that null mirroring partner right there that's coming in from SQL. So we have to deal with these nulls.
Sean, when you're talking about mirroring partner, you're talking about SQL Server Mirroring or always on AG?
I'm talking about SQL mirroring, but it could be AG as well, right? So let's say that you have an AG, because pulling these from basically from sys databases, right? So these columns that are coming in from this system table, it has mirroring partner and it has AG groups and it has AG group ID and all of that, right? I mean, it has all of these different columns in there for these things. And most of the time on a lot of systems, these are going to be null because you're not mirroring these guys every single database, and you're probably not, you probably don't have every single database in an AG either, right?
Got it.
So if I were to come here, let me just come into here and say, got mouse troubles again. Let's say start from sys.databases. There we go. So I got these guys right here, and you can see I'm going to have a whole bunch of these columns. Group database ID, replica ID, right? Resource pool ID. And then there's the mirroring stuff in there as well. It's probably a little further along. Might still be in there. But you see all of these, for right now, it's these AG IDs. It's these AG columns, right? Replica ID, group database ID, right? All of these guys in here that are going to be null most of the time.
Yep.
So when I'm pulling these guys in from here, the problem is that it's doing exactly what I told it to, right? It's setting for every single row in that database list, it's setting mirroring partner equal to the mirroring partner of the current row. and tacking it onto the SP call. Well, this row coming in is null, which means there's nothing there. But that's not how we specify null in SQL, right? So all we get is a comma and then that null value. So that's, as syntax goes, that's going to break.
Yeah, because it's missing the extra comma.
No, because it has an extra comma.
Ah, got it. Yep.
What it's missing is the word null, right? Because when we specify something as null in SQL, we have to write the word null, right? So let me come back here. So let's go ahead and fix that. And we've solved the nulls like this. I'm going to check this value as it comes in. So I'm going to say if the incoming row equals db null, I'll talk about that in a second, or if it equals null, then I want you to set this variable to the word null. Otherwise, I want you to set it to the value coming in. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So what I'm going to get here in number 8, and we've got a couple things to talk about with number 8. Let's go ahead and clear our screen again. And we'll say .whack 08. There we go. So now I'm printing these guys, and you can see we've slowed down, right? I think we might even be writing to the database now. But you see at the end, we're getting that null value that we need to pass into the SP, because you can't just leave it. So now I'm getting that null value that's going to be passed into the SP. Let me see if we're actually writing. Yeah, we're actually writing with Invoke Sql Command. So I'm printing them to the screen and I'm saving them to the database. And so that's via an SP call for every single row. So we are, and you saw it's writing at an okay speed, but it's not BCP speeds or anything, right? I mean, it's actually, as far as that goes, it's actually pretty slow. And that's kind of, you know, the hit you take, especially when you're using something like Invoke Sql Command, because it is considerably slower. And then you're doing all of this in here as well, all of this checking in here as well. Now, there are a couple things we need to talk about here. First is db null. We all know what a null value is, right? It means nothing. So you would think that nothing is nothing is nothing, right? A null is a null is a null. But unfortunately, it's not. There are database nulls and there are .NET nulls. So up here, I have set this db null variable equal to system.db null to the value of system.database null. So what I'm saying here is, if this is a database null, if it's a .NET null, because I could have entered a line up here that did something else with it and accidentally changed it into a .NET null, then I want to set it to the word null. Easy enough, right? Now this guy right here is, understand, this is string interpolation. And you notice how I don't have, yeah. Okay. So here's, let me show you how this works. Are you familiar enough with PowerShell to know string interpolation? I think I've just messed that up. There we go. Steve?
Nope, not really.
Okay. So string interpolation is what allows us, let's pop out the PowerShell real quick and let's clear the screen again. So string interpolation, let's say I have, let me get to my PowerShell layer. There we go. Let's say I have .a or cache A equals Sean. There we go. I can say cache A and I can print Sean to the screen, right? So string interpolation allows me to say something like, right? And so it allows you to get past all of that ridiculous string building that we have to do in SQL and other languages by just taking the value of A and recognizing that we want to put that in there and giving it to you there, so you don't have to do something like my name is space, right, plus, oops, A, right, something like that, right? So you don't have to do something like that. And then in our case, it would be plus period plus, right? So that string building. So that's called string interpolation. It pulls the value out of that for you, right? But look what we're doing here. We're doing this weird thing, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at why we're doing that. So A, if I get back up there, oops, there we go. So A is a string, and I can prove that by doing a get member on it. And I see it's a string right there. And I see the only property it has is length. So I can access that length by saying, and how long is it? It's 4 characters long. So I should be able to say something like this. My name is a length long, right? But that's what I get is my name is Sean.length_long. So how come it didn't interpolate this property instead, right? So it interpolates the values, not the properties. And you'll see that up at the top where we were able to put a period at the end of our sentence and still got Sean, right? So what we have to do, and is put parentheses around this guy. So now the parentheses are an execution object in PowerShell. So what I'm saying is, for my variable interpolation, is I'm saying is my name is blank long, and I'm saying execute this and give me the value of this, right? And then finish up. So when I do this, well, look what I get now. My name is, it gave me exactly what I told it to give me. But if this is variable interpolation, then how come it didn't interpolate this variable, right? So that's the problem, is it's variable interpolation. So I need to put a variable marker in front of this. So this is kind of like a temporary variable, kind of like we have temp tables in SQL. This is a temp variable instead of an inline temp variable. So it's saying, take all of this and execute it because it's inside parentheses, and then save it as a temporary variable, and then interpolate the value of that variable for me. Clear as mud, right? So take the property, the value of the property, save it as a variable, and then give it to me. So now when I do it this way, I get my name is 4 long.
So the $sign forces that to evaluate, right? Force to get the value out of the variable.
Not only the value out of the variable, but the value out of the property.
The property, okay.
Right? So here, because you see here, when I did that without the temporary variable up here, it just printed that exact same thing for me, right? It interpreted the variable, right? Because it's variable interpolation, and it pulled the value out of the variable, and everything else was taken literally. But when I tell it to save that as a variable, that execution context kicks in, and it says, oh, okay, so you want me to execute this, save it as a variable, and then variable's property, and interpolate it, or the variable's value, interpolate it, and then here we are with 4.
Could you use the $sign on a length?
No.
Because length does not exist without the
Right. Length is not a variable, so it would be null.
Got it. Okay.
So now I can come in here if I want to, and I can surround this guy, oops, with single quotes if I want to, right? And now I get this. So I can surround that in single quotes. And that is what we're doing here. So I'm saying set mirroring partner equal to this string interpolated value right here, surrounded with single quotes, because it's going to be a text object, and put it in my SP call. So the value itself, when it gets down below, is going to be put into, is going to already have the single quotes. And you see some of these others I've put in line right there for recovery model, right there for database name. I'm surrounding them in single quotes down here, but I really prefer to do all of that work up top and then just have nothing but variables down here. I'm going to skip the Christmas tree problem. We're going for a long time now, so let's jump to the bulk insert real quick. There's a lot to talk about, and I've actually got this session already recorded on Midnight DBA. And I think I'm able to cover a little bit more. So if you're hungry for more, I'm also going to record this because I think I've got like 3 to 5 hours worth of material here, and I'm going to record it all as a free session up on Midnight DBA. So I'll send out a tweet when that's ready, and I'm going to discuss all of this stuff to death. So as bulk inserts go, so here I'm setting my query. This my import module here. What am I doing here? Why am I doing the import module? Oh, I see, because I'm using Invoke Sql Command to get the name of the server from a table. Okay. Now, bulk inserting. You're really shifting the problem from one area to another, right? This whole null problem, right? Or all the problems that you had in there with the rebar that you could have with the rebar, with different nulls and other different things that you have to deal with for. So here, I'm setting a client query. It's the same query we used before. See how it ends in mirroring partner. Right there, I'm trying to double click. There we go. From collector DB properties. And I don't know how many rows are there. We'll go look at it in a second. And here I've got my connection string. It's the same connection string we used before. I've got my same connection object that we had before. I've got my same command object that I had before. And I've got a reader object. So now I'm using my SQL reader again, because the SQL reader is the fastest way to do this. And I don't have to worry about all of that stuff because I'm bulk inserting. So this was all the source data, right? This is the client connection string, the client connection. Now I'm going to put that data somewhere. I'm going to take it from one system and put it directly into another system. So I need my repository connection string. And now I'm going to create a bulk copy object. All of these objects we've created, connection, command, it only makes sense that we have to create a bulk copy object as well, right? And for that bulk copy object, I have to pass it in the connection string. And what else? And any bulk copy options that I want to put in there. And we're not going to be able to talk about these at length today, but for right now, we're going to pass it in keep identity. There's plenty to be said about that stuff. And now I'm going to set the destination table name what table do I want to put it into. I've already saved that into a variable repo table right here. It's dbo.databases. And where am I? There I am. And I'm going to call write to server, the write method, and pass it in that SQL reader object that we just read in all the data. And now I'm going to take that direct, super fast fire hose one read only cursor, and I'm going to write that entire thing to the server all at once as a bulk copy. This is basically, you know, PowerShell's BCP, right? Now, how much faster are we talking about here? Well, remember when we did, which one was it? Was it this one, I think, where we did, yeah. So here we're using Invoke Sql Command to rebar all the way through, right? And call that SP every single time. And we're only pulling in like, I thought where's my query? Oh, right. So I'm pulling in a database list. There it is. So it's just a list of databases. So it's like 40 or 50 servers, right? Something like that. However many servers this is, if I can get my mouse to work. So however many servers this is, right? Or databases. So however many databases that is. And you saw it was okay. Let's go ahead and run that one again just to show you. So that's number 8. If I just, no. And I'll say 08. There we are. And let's just watch this. Okay. You get a good sense for how fast it's going. And in here, we're selecting everything from, oops, wrong one. There we are. And here we're selecting everything from collector.db properties. So I'm just going to do that. Come on, man. There we go. Let's come back here and let's see how many rows we're talking about. Stop it. There we go. And let's use minion. Yep, there we are. Could have sworn I said. Okay, so 88,000 rows, right? So now let's run this one, and that's number 12. So now we're going to bulk insert 88,000 rows. Let's do a clear screen. There we go. That's how fast we can do that with a bulk operation. Let's do that one more time. Don't blink, you'll miss it. There we go. 88,000 rows in a bulk insert. Boom, just like that. So the bulk insert definitely has some advantages to being able to process data a lot faster, right? The code is cleaner. It's easier to make this into a, it's a lot easier to make this into a function, which I've also done. And there are a lot of caveats with this. I'm going to say go to Midnight DBA and watch, or either the one that's already up there, or watch the entire series when I get it done, which I'm actually going to start on it today, or maybe tomorrow. And I'll explain all of this stuff. But there's a lot to talk about here with this, because there are a couple caveats, but in general, the bulk method is very efficient and very fast. It solves a few problems and causes a few problems, but again, we'll get to that some other time. And this is usually about as far as I get in this. I usually get like maybe 1 or 2 more scripts, but this is a really good stopping point, I think, because how long have we been going for? Probably quite some time, huh?
Yep.
Yeah. So, and like I said, there's only so much of me that people can take. So I don't know how that got changed. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and call it there. And if you have any questions, you know, shoot them out. I mean, while I'm here. If not, then that's cool too. And I realize that, you know, this can be a pretty dry topic. You know, there's a good deal of waiting, and I had some mouse troubles and all that. So, you know, if anybody's stuck with us this far, then good for them. But yeah, this can be a dry topic.
I think that was a good session. Yes, there's way too much to fit into 60 minutes.
Yeah.
Question about, so I used Invoke. So are you using PS Core, or it doesn't make any difference?
Right now, this isn't PS Core, and I'm not sure what the capabilities are. I don't know how complete the .NET library is for PS Core, but it should have these basic functions in it, or these basic classes in it, but I don't know if it does.
Got it. How about, can you talk a bit about Dba Tools? So I see you pulling .NET and Invoke SQL, but why wouldn't we use Dba Tools, for instance?
I've never used Dba Tools, so I don't know what its capabilities are with stuff like this.
Got it. Fair enough.
I write my own stuff, so right. If they have a bulk insert object, then it's going to work like this behind the scenes.
Yes.
And so I'm showing you how to do it. And once you get a function created, there's not going to be a hell of a lot of difference between doing something like if they have one. Like I said, I don't know if they do, but I wouldn't imagine there would be a hell of a lot of difference between using this as a function and just calling a function and calling, you know, the Dba Tools commandlet, because, you know, you'd have to pass in parameters to a function and you'd have to pass in arguments to the commandlet. So it'd be basically at that point.
Yep.
So
yeah. Thanks for the presentation.